So I was just going to kick this off and introduce again the Industry Advisory Council and what has happened in the past year, and then really have Sanjay and Gary take over, who've been part of the Industry Advisory Council. And I last minute roped Jeff into this because I thought it's always good to have new faces and new voices as part of the discussion. So forgive me, but I hope you enjoy the ride. So the idea of the Industry Advisory Council, as we stated before, is that as a community we are in need for input from companies. We need to understand the kind of regulatory knowledge that companies have. We need to be able to look at the world of drug development, understand what kind of challenges and gaps exist, so that we as a physician, scientist, and patient community can help move the field forward and accelerate development. And likewise, companies here, I think in this forum, have access to patients, have access to physician experts, and can gain knowledge on natural history or unmet needs that might be much harder for them to get to outside of a forum like this. That's the next slide. So I'm probably just going to skip over this. Next slide. The mission of the Industry Advisory Council, as was formulated by members of the council, and sadly Mark Shearman couldn't be here, who led this effort, was really to bring together strengths and identify gaps within the field, make use of synergies and complementary perspectives. Industry knows what it takes to bring a drug to market, what regulatory hurdles and steps are. ALD Connect has physicians who know the disease, has patients who know what is important and clinically meaningful. And the big challenge, I guess, to the group that we've been discussing is can we define a pre-competitive space? Is there an area outside of proprietary aspects of drug development where we can all help each other? And clearly this starts with natural history. It might extend into biomarkers. And most importantly, it has to do with listening to patients. And I think one of the nice things of the council so far has been that we always started with a patient story at the beginning of every meeting, and just hearing the patient's story and recognizing what a lifelong burden this disease is, and what kinds of repercussions it has been huge. So I'm just going to run through some quick topics. Next slide. So we've talked about trial readiness for AMN. The Industry Advisory Council has been very helpful in providing letters of support for our grants. They formed an advisory committee for our U01 grant to NIH, and we'll be going forward in February with the next submission. So we're hoping we're going to be stronger and after addressing some of the criticism. And we've talked about standardizing MR imaging. We've brought experts from MGH here together. Rachel Salzman talked about Work Group 3 mission and work on identifying candidate therapeutics. Kathy Sokowski presented her work from Kennedy Krieger on outcome measures in women with AMN. Next slide. Ali Fatemi came and spoke about how to utilize and use ALD Connect to enable clinical trial readiness, again along the lines of what we're doing in our U01 grant. And Alex Sherman and Tara O'Mara have been having various presentations about developments within Neurobank and how to make it more user-friendly and what services it could provide. And I think Alex touched upon the most recent presentation by Biogen on wearable devices, which I think is very exciting and hopefully something that we're going to continue to think about as we move forward. So that was just a quick summary of what the last year in terms of topics brought about. And I'll maybe turn over to Sanjay, since he's been part of the IAC the longest, and then you can rope in Gary and Jeff.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me here. I'm Sanjay Magavi. I'm a scientist at Vertex Pharmaceuticals in our Discovery Biology group. First of all, I'd like to say this is a great meeting, and this is a really great group of people to have here. From my point of view, I think the most valuable aspect of being a part of the Industry Advisory Board is really getting to meet the patients and get a sense directly from them what the disease is and what it really means to them from the patient perspective. And I think that's, it's incredibly informative, it's moving and, really motivating. And I think that Ben and Alex and Florian have talked about a lot of things. They've covered all of the things that are really important from an industry point of view, and I'm just going to mention a couple of those same things again. So it's great to be able to work together in this preclinical space, and the main thing we want to do is to develop a set of tools and metrics that really allow us to measure patient benefit and to make sure that we can test our drugs and really prove that they're doing something good for patients. And understanding what those tests are, what we should be measuring and looking for, I think that's clearly a goal of the group, and I think it's making some nice progress there. A second thing is finding biomarkers, and I think sometimes finding biomarkers is quite possibly sometimes harder than actually finding a drug. And being able to work together to pool resources to look at lots of patients is, I think, a key direction that would be great for us to move in. And I think there's already, others have already expressed interest there, so I'm optimistic about that. Then, finding the patients obviously is a key activity for us. And seeing all the activities with the Neurobank and the patient portal has been, really, really cool and very interesting. Definitely encourage everyone to enroll, and we really want to get as much information there and many people there. So if we do find something that we think is worth taking to the clinic, that we can find patients as quickly as possible and really, make progress on that. And then, just listening to things this morning, I was thinking about what can the Industry Advisory Board maybe do for the community. And one thing I was thinking is, how can we support newborn screening? As a bench scientist, I don't know what all the issues in that are, but if there are ways we can bring resources to that problem and increase newborn screening, I think that would be a really great step for us to take. And that's pretty much my comments. So.
Yeah, I would repeat everything. Oh, sorry. I'm Gary Fortin. I'm with Bluebird Bio. I'm the program lead for our development program there. I'm actually here representing some of my colleagues. So Kendrick with the bicycle helmet. So hopefully he's having a good time riding his bike today. He's actually really sad that he couldn't be here. And Tara as well. The two of them have really been kind of the critical conduit between the IAC and Bluebird. And I'm a bit of a newer addition to the team, to the group, and so hopefully I can do them justice and represent kind of what they think. It's almost like their notes were just read before this. They find, and I think we all at Bluebird find extreme value in being part of this Industry Advisory Council. But I do think that Kendrick put it best. I won't repeat everything that was said, and I'll kind of expand a little bit. Kendrick kind of put it best in describing the council, in that it's a bunch of brilliant minds from a patient perspective, from a clinician perspective, an advocate perspective, an academic perspective, an industry perspective. And they've all come to the pool party, and they're all ready to engage, and they're really excited about being there. But unfortunately, right now, they're kind of all standing around the pool, and they haven't really jumped in yet. And so, at least from a Bluebird perspective, what we're really excited about is jumping in that pool next year, and as soon as we can. And I think one of the things that's come up a number of times today is this issue of standardization and definitions, right? So we talk about the pre-competitive space and really coming together in that pre-competitive space, but I don't think we're really clear on what is the pre-competitive space, because competition or pre-competitive for Bluebird might be different from Vertex, it might be different from another company. And so at the end of the day, we're each one person from our company sitting on this committee, but we do need to go back to the company and get buy-in to really participate at this level. So having that guidebook of like what it means to be pre-competitive, what it means to be involved in the IAC, would really help us gain that momentum with our leadership teams to really get them engaged. Because I think, at the end of the day, there's no question that all of our leadership teams and all of our companies are fully invested in everything that we're trying to do here. But in terms of really getting that permission to pull the trigger and jump in, having that rule and that guidebook would really be helpful. So representing the Bluebird folks here, that's kind of an ask that we have as we embark into 2017 and how to kind of expand upon all the great progress that's been made in 2016, is really starting to standardize and define what it really means to be an effective and collaborative partner in this team. So with that, I will turn it over, and then we can answer any questions, I guess.
Intro? Okay. This is going to get complicated. I'm the only CEO sitting up here, and I'm not a CEO of this company. So I'm CEO of ophthalmology company. I'm an executive chairman of a company that we're trying to develop a drug to actually reverse neuroinflammation in patients with CCALD and cerebral palsy and potentially other opportunities. And I was, up until last year, I was head of a public company that actually has a drug on the market, almost on the market, for an orphan disease in children also. So I've had a lot of experience in the orphan disease space. And I think the one thing I just want to communicate as the CEO is that we have to return value to shareholders, but at the same time, and I know Nick really well, and he feels the same way. I think we have to do something for the patients. And so I had the privilege actually 2 weeks ago of having dinner at the Kelly's house. I think many of you know Gene Kelly, Jack, and Brian, who's Brian's Hope. And I guess that's what really motivates me to be here right now. I'm supposed to be at another job, and I think we need to figure out a way as a business, and I'm happy to talk to Nick, about how we can collaborate better to make sure we get these therapies more efficiently to patients. And I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, natural history is absolutely key. And anything we can do to share, historical untreated data is going to really advance the field, because our experience with talking to FDA has been, do placebo controls, because we're not convinced by the natural history. And so I think the more we can get that natural history data out, the less you have to put your children or the adults at risk in a placebo-controlled trial. And I think really trying to push that aspect of this panel is going to create a huge value for everybody that's involved, because we don't have to waste time, resources, and patience on a placebo-controlled study. And the FDA, I can tell you, that's part of the reason, if you saw the Duchesne's back and forth, they kind of intimated that that's why it took so long for the Duchesne's drugs to get approved, is they had no data. They had no way to know if the drug was efficacious, because the natural history wasn't there. There was no placebo control. And so if we can get around that by creating more data and sharing it amongst the companies and sharing it with KKI, I know Ali is paying attention, Ali? Try to share that with as many companies as possible, all that huge historical database. I think that can really advance the field and make better options for patients. And at the same time, all of us can return value to our shareholders. So.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for being a good sport to step in. He had exactly 10 seconds notice. So. Let's open this up. Should we have questions and thoughts from the audience? Rachel or Fiza?
What can I, as a patient, do? What can I offer? What can I contribute? What can I bring to the table? I'll go to the ends of the earth. What can I do to assist in your efforts?
I would say please continue doing exactly what you did earlier today, because one of such an important thing from a data collection standpoint is that patient-reported outcome, and as Alex mentioned, that real-world evidence, that real-world data. And in order for that data to be impactful, it needs to really represent the patient experience. And in the company, in industry, we don't always understand fully what it means, and to hear the way you nuance some of the scales and some of the way things were described, I was taking notes like crazy, because as we develop endpoints and outcome measures and things like that, it'll be critical for us to know that. So my advice is, or my request is, just please, as in whatever form you can, to continue doing what you did this morning.
Yeah, I think the advocacy efforts that you're doing are excellent. The more you can encourage your fellow patients to do the same as you're doing, that is going to be powerful.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is some way to more do what you were, I think, intimating, which is get some more quantitative metrics. Because ultimately, when we're trying to develop a drug in this space, we have to go to the FDA, and the FDA is going to say, show me a clinically meaningful endpoint, and prove to me that you've made an improvement in that clinically meaningful endpoint. So the more quantitative that data set you can generate, and to your point, about the descriptions, maybe doing, coming up with a scoring system or something like that. And then when there's a drug available, having that application and validating that metric will allow us potentially to get drugs through the approval process. Because that's one of the challenges that when we go to the FDA with these rare diseases, what's the right metric? Nobody's ever tried to develop a drug in this space. How do we know what the right endpoint is? And they usually don't accept surrogates like biomarkers, because if it doesn't affect the symptomology of the disease, it doesn't mean anything to them. So we have to figure out a way, working with you, since you lived the experience, what would be clinically meaningful to you? And that's, I think, helpful as you move forward with your application.
Hello, this is Lisa Feuchtbaum with the Genetic Disease Screening Program in California, and I just had a question about the biomarkers that I think Sanjay, is that mentioned, and I'm just curious to know more about that, and to also let you know that we've been banking newborn blood spots in California through something we call the California Biobank, and we have blood spots, dating back to 1982, and patients with ALD have been very helpful in allowing us and consenting to use those blood spots for the purposes of developing newborn screening platforms. So that's been very helpful. But I'm curious about the biomarkers, and are they biomarkers that potentially could be something that you'd want to look in the newborn blood spot? Just a thought, because I don't know much about the biomarker research.
Yeah. So at this point, the really the only biomarker are the very long chain fatty acids that are being measured in the newborn screening. This would really have to be sort of like a deep discovery effort to try to find out what those biomarkers are, and it'd be useful perhaps for stratifying patients, trying to figure out, who's going to get the cerebral form of the disease or the adult form of the disease. And perhaps that's mainly environmental, which makes that a huge challenge. But it would definitely be sort of like a deep dive into the biology. And I think when we get some candidates, looking at those newborn blood spots will probably be one of the first key experiments that we'd want to do.
Thanks.
Yeah, I really like the spirit of the Industry Advisory Council, but do you have deliverables? Just like tangibly, what is it to be delivered? I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and as we embarked on this journey, my goal was to not tell the industry what their deliverables should be, but have them over time, take on the driver's seat and make decisions collectively on what deliverables should be, right? So this is not an ALD Connect driven process. This is industry driving this process, and hopefully recognizing the tremendous opportunity of interfacing with the patient community, with physician scientists, and maybe seeing a space where they could work together and help each other. But I see now after a few meetings that there is now a definition of some deliverables emerging, but it's been a process. And I think coming back to what Gary said is, this standing around the pool waiting for who will jump in, or hoping that the neighbor won't push the other one in, or likewise. That's a little bit where we are, and I see this sort of as a gentle nudging process, if you allow me that analogy. And I think I would love to challenge you to have Kendrick put forth a guidebook of what this pre-competitive space and standardization definitions may be. And just discuss it, because I think one of the challenges it is different for every company, but unless we talk about it, we won't know that, right?
Yeah, we don't really have any deliverables per se at this point, but we all share the same motivation to bring some sort of therapeutic to market, and that's a key activity, I think, for everyone in that room.
Just one point I think that we sometimes forget is that this is very new. So there's been, 3 meetings so far? So they're quarterly, so 3 kind of get-togethers. And I really like the roadmap that Florian showed earlier today, which is kind of like that roadmap to developing a therapeutic, and how we're identifying at this point really all the gaps in how to make that happen. And so it seems like this year for the IAC, it was really about that gap analysis. Like where do we need to fill? Where do we need to bridge and whatnot? And then from that, these deliverables will clearly be defined. And Kendrick will be psyched that he'll have homework from this meeting, so I will make sure to let him know.
Come, you get home.
Exactly.
Ali, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say, I think the identification of the gaps is the very first step. Identify what do we need to collect, what have we collected, and then we can come and say, well, you need to go online in patient portal and fill this out versus fill that out. And you made a great demonstration today of how off I think the patient portal is based on what it should really be collecting. Right. But I think that's exactly what we want to do. We identify this gap, and right now we have that. Right. So I think that will be the very first step. It's just the biggest challenge perhaps will be to put that on paper and write down. And I'm not signing up myself. Okay. I'm not volunteering for this task.
Kendrick will do it.
Right. Kendrick will do it. Right. What are the gaps that are present today? And we had a meeting. In May of ALD Connect, I guess it was the work group 2 or 3 meeting, and we had this very discussion, trying to come up with what are the gaps that are really there that we should collect. And we had, I think, very good consensus on that day that we can tap into all the existing scales that are out there, and we really utilize patient portal far more than we are. There are scales from the spinal cord injury community on bladder dysfunction. There are scales from the various psychiatric communities on different levels of mental issues that are prevalent also in this population, and so on and so on. And we could actually take those scales that have been validated in those populations, put them on the patient portal, study them rapidly, because if we really have 360 members that are active, that's a pretty big number. That's a pretty good data set that we could collect over a year. What I think one of the gaps that is missing is how do we make this all happen, right? We all have the same thought process here, and I feel like we've had this meeting now, and we have made progress, but the breakthrough sort of is kind of missing. And is it dollars? Is it that we need simply $10 million to make this happen, $5 million to make this happen? Is it that we need to identify a core group of people who are going to take this on, and each of these tasks that are gaps, and run with it? I think that's sort of what they're missing here still.
I think one kind of way I've shifted my thought process over the past couple of years in terms of the coordination between patient groups, pharma, and academics is that while we all hope for the one big breakthrough that will transform care, we can also take the alternative approach that kind of through incremental advances we can really shift our achievable care. So if you look at the treatment of pediatric cancer over the past 50 or 70 years, there's been advances in what's available, but there's been no one single treatment that's been a game changer. Rather, it's been how they've worked on delivering care, how they've used the tools that they have available. And I think that could be kind of a model for how we think of care. I think another model that Keith Van Haren likes to bring up is in terms of treatment of children with cystic fibrosis, that there's been no curative treatment that's taken the disease away, but by better using available therapies, better care for patients, that we've turned it from a disease that kills children in the first decade of life to something where people are now living with near normal life expectancies. And so I think we can, all working together, make use of the different technologies that we're all developing to achieve great things for patients with ALD or NAMN.
So Lisa Feuchtbaum again. So being someone that's been exposed to a lot of work in the area of newborn screening for all these years, I just want to point you to a group that I think has been highly successful in building a consortium that I see kind of starting to happen here in maybe baby steps, and it's the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They are a powerhouse of basically doing what you guys are trying to do, but magnified 1,000 times. And they have a huge conference once a year, 4 days, and goes over. It's patients, it's partnerships between providers and industry, and it's a very powerful organization. And so I just wanted, I don't know if you can reach out to the folks that are at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and find out a little about the history of how they built that, because it's an amazing organization, and I'm always so impressed when I go to those meetings. So.
Actually, I can respond to this. So I've been to a meeting a couple of weeks ago at MIT where there was a discussion about this exact issue. And the way they started is 12 years ago, 14 years ago, they issued an RFP and sent to 100 companies, biotech and pharma, and asked them whether they can, whether they could, those companies will be interested in doing research in cystic fibrosis. And out of 100 invitations, only 4 companies responded. And only one, and one of the reasons is that there were no known biomarkers. So the disease was unknown. So, and out of these 4, so they selected one company, and over the years, they funded this company, the research of this company, targeted research, I believe, started with 10 million a year. And they ended up investing, I believe, 140, 150 million over all this time. But the beauty of, and the reason why this foundation is so prominent nowadays, is one of the things they did is they retained the rights for royalties on the future drug. So basically, they're saying, here's the investing, you don't have to give us back anything, but if you're successful, I don't know whether we can develop such a model with the industry, but if you're successful, you have to share the success with us. And later on, they sold their royalty rights. The company, again, so Vertex is the owner of the drug, so I'm not commenting on this, right? So, but basically the foundation got $3.2 billion, as in B. So that's why it allows you to have, successful meetings later on. But what's important to emphasize that the first drug that was approved was for a very minor, tiny part of the population, like 4% or so. But then the next drug, the next iteration of the drug was for 60% of the population and so on. So it's very important to, and that's exactly what we're talking about, the model, right? So how to develop the disease. And I don't know, we're all for it, right? So what's fascinating here is that someone came up with this idea, and actually I asked the former CEO of the foundation who came up. I mean, usually when we deal with foundations, we're saying, just find the cure, right? So who cares about the money, right? So find the cure. So someone came up with this idea, brilliant, kind of in hindsight, how to get the money back into the disease. So I don't know. So probably Vertex can talk more. If you're allowed to.
Yeah, I think Vertex has a strong history of working with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and we're certainly open to doing so again. Yeah, I mean,
So
it's been obviously an incredible success on both sides, and that's been, important.
just one additional question for the panel. Sanjay, I think you mentioned the potential for environmental factors to change the path of this disease. Is there something, well, first, I guess this is actually a two-part question. First, when you talk about environmental factors or environmental things, one, what are you talking about? And two, can we account for those things? Can we start to gather particular data in the patient portal that would satisfy your concerns?
Yeah, I think actually I would probably give this question over to the clinicians in the room. Maybe I'll throw this to Florian about, it seems like contusions can trigger the cerebral form of the disease, but I will give it to the experts to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, our understanding of the disease and its phenotypes is evolving. I mean, there's no question about that. That every year there are new insights, whether they're coming from model systems or they're coming from patients who are having particular experiences. I think we want to create that kind of openness where we're receptive to any of these new insights. And I think one of the challenges that either Gary or Sanjay addressed was that the better the definition of the disease and its course, the more successful future therapies will be. Some of the challenges we have in the more chronic diseases is that we maybe don't have as stringent a definition biologically as well as in terms of outcome about what we're targeting and how, and knowing that will help us get better biomarkers and understanding of what environmental factors play a role here. But I wanted to turn back to something that Sanjay said about how can we support newborn screening, and when you say something like that on a panel, then you get taken up. So we have. So Brad Sakes is here, and I don't know if Brad, you can speak a little bit about the efforts of newborn screening in Washington State. You'll be talking about it later, but you just heard an industry member say, how can I support newborn screening? Could you just speak to whether there are challenges or gaps where companies might be able to help?
Yeah, that's a great question, and not sure I'm prepared to even know how to answer it at the moment. Our efforts were purely grassroots. Started with a family affected by the disease and started talking to our local Board of Health. But we were very fortunate to be partnered from the start with Bluebird Bio. I was friends with Nick Leshley. We served on the Bio Board of Directors together. And along the way, the company provided us with some financial support in our lobbying efforts and in our work with the Board of Health, and now as we enter the next phase in working with the state legislature to approve the fee increase. We took a bit of a unique step in our effort in that when we went to the Board of Health and made our pitch to add ALD to the newborn screening panel, we really didn't quite know at the time what we were getting into, and we didn't know what the key decision criteria were, but we thought we would go out on a limb and offer to pay for the tandem mass specs that would be required to perform the test at our lab in Washington State. For those of you that don't know, they're about $500,000 a piece, maybe not quite that much, but they're not cheap. And that actually ended up being a pretty influential give on our part, because ultimately these decisions, as much as we hate to admit it, come down to money. And so the extent to which industry can support some of these grassroots efforts in any form of financial support, I'm not suggesting that you go out and pay for these tandem mass specs, but if you can help at the grassroots level in just providing the necessary support to provide some of these families or foundations with educating even just on cost effectiveness, cost benefit. I think a lot of groups stumble on that particular issue. Helping some of these groups understand what are the criteria that the Board of Health or the state legislatures evaluate when they're undergoing this decision making to add a new disease to the newborn screening panel. Just support in any way you can, I think, would be helpful to these efforts. Not sure if that helps or not, but that's my response.
No, that's great, and I think we'll talk more about newborn screening later. Where do you think the Industry Advisory Council will be in a year? Can we envision a little bit what we might want to accomplish in the next year? Is there, Gary and Sanjay, can you think outside the box? We're not going to hold you to anything, but maybe outline, a little bit what you think may be real opportunities here, concrete items that you would want to address here, and how can we as a community help get you there?
I think it would be excellent if we, at that point, had some sort of strategy for looking for biomarkers. I mean, it'd be even great if we started implementing it by then, but I don't know if that's ambitious. To do that, we would need to, we'd have to have some sort of concept, of course. There are a couple of them being batted around, I think. But then we'd need to get patient samples, and, we'd have to find, someone who is willing to do the work at the bench. And I think having a structure or plan for that within a year that'd be excellent progress. And, I think this ongoing conversation about what sort of clinical metrics are important to show patient benefit is, I think that's going to be continuously evolving, and getting the point where we have something that is advanced enough that, we can go to the FDA and say, for AMN patients, showing these kind of benefits are, powerful and good for patients. For CALD, it's such and such. I think those would be two, very significant goals for the next year.
And just to add to that, I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that glossary of terms, that definition guide of exactly what we're talking about, whether it be pre-competitive, whether it be the outcome measures, the symptoms, whatever the case, having that actual tangible book of terms, I think will be critical. And then going to something that Ali mentioned that I think is really an important first step to really define this foundation is that very strong administrative and logistical framework that will actually enable us to move these initiatives forward. because, as I said before, the ideas are there and the commitment is there, but the actual technical expertise to move things over, the project management, I think Florian even mentioned this earlier, the project management and the administrative logistical support is what we need to figure out. And I think each of us as an independent contributor from industry has to come together and really define what will that be, what will that require, and what will that be. And for me, that would be a huge win if we could figure that out in this next year.
I think that's really it, how to operationalize this task, and I think, and maybe I'm wrong, I think it's a money issue. I think if we had a Ice Bucket Challenge for ALD, it wouldn't have been an issue because we would have hired, 50 project managers or people who do this for a living. And am I wrong in that?
No, I do think that resources and financial support is critical to that. So maybe deliverable number one is Icebox Challenge for ALD in Q1. But that being said, I mean, we have the expertise in the room. I do think we have the expertise in the room, and like I said, we have the commitment in the room. And so I wouldn't want to be restricted by not having all the money in the world, but I do think any financial contribution or resource contribution that we could add would be helpful, but it's more just about operationalizing and standardizing what we already have in the room, because I don't think we take full advantage of the talent just here today.
I sort of agree with you to a certain extent. I think it's got to be someone's full-time job to do whatever we decide to do, and it can't be, to a certain, even if you have 20 people each putting in 5% time, it's not the same as someone whose primary responsibility is to execute on whatever we have. It's difficult.
And my critique to you guys on the industry side is that I feel that each company has more or less a relatively dedicated team, but it's focused very much on its own, interests and not on the community's interest. And so that, I, on the academic side, get called by 5 different companies wanting to have the same thing from me. And so, I think is there a way to establish some sort of an entity that would be perhaps, fueled by all industry partners? I think more than on the academic side and perhaps on the patient side, more on the industry side, you guys really know how to operational things, right? I mean, that's what you do for a living, right? Aside from the R&D aspect. But so.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, as part of that rule book, that guidebook, a type of charter in terms of like what we're really looking to accomplish, so that we can go back to the expertise that we have in our companies to bring that forward. Because right now, it's like I said before, we're one person kind of representing this, and how do we adequately represent the needs and expectations of the Industry Advisory Council if we don't have the hard and fast rule book of what those expectations are? So that would be hugely helpful to bring it to that next level.
In terms of patient engagement and, ALD Connect can bring patients, and we want to get involved. What would be helpful for you guys, for us to bring? I mean, we've talked about maybe tweaking the portal and seeing if we can, are there specific questions that you guys would like answered that here's your group, 360 of us from the patient side on the portal, or whatever the number is. Would it be helpful for us to organize, groups of patients that you could talk to, or dial-ins, or what? I'm just wondering what kind of engagement can we bring, because, it's this. The patients want a seat at this table as well, and so we're just wondering, how can we organize ourselves? We can certainly ask each other questions. You guys are not allowed to ask us, and at this stage in the game. So, for me, it's very helpful to know what can we be doing with my fellow patients to advance this cause.
Well, one thing that was so striking to me from an earlier presentation today with the NeuroTracker was the disconnect between the patient-reported outcomes piece and the physician clinical import of patient data. And so much of what we do is dependent on that natural history clinic-reported data. And so any work that you could do from a patient perspective to empower the clinicians to input that data, to marry those two data sets, the patient-reported outcome and the clinical outcome, would do huge things for us. And so I think you raise a good point. Like, as industry, we do not go directly to the patient, and we can't ask the patients those questions. But we do talk to the clinicians, and to have kind of that reinforcement from the patient perspective to kind of encourage that physician engagement would be hugely beneficial to us.
Well, can I follow up on that? Because on the Neurobank side, the data is being entered by certain clinicians, scientists. There's going to be an upper limit there, and it's my belief that the real growth potential is in the patient portal, and it's in the patient-reported data. And if we fine-tune that enough, why can't we ask what the clinicians are asking? And if there's significant overlap between the Neurobank entered data and the patient portal data, why doesn't that validate all 370 participants' answers? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we could potentially get to that point. I think Alex's earlier comment about validating these tools is kind of right now the gap in that, right? So in order to use that data, because of validation issues from a natural history standpoint, as we go to the regulatory agencies and whatnot, it's difficult to make those comparisons between the patient-reported and the clinical input. For instance, MRI reads or data like that would be critical for our discussions with regulatory agents and really kind of define the natural history of these diseases. It's more difficult to validate that data coming from a patient voice versus clinical input, at least today. Can we get to a point where the overlap is sufficient to validate that? I hope so, but I don't know if we're quite there yet.
And is it in your mind, is it the objective things, the MRIs, the standardized walking tests? I
think that's the biggest thing. Yeah, that's the biggest disconnect between the two kind of portals right now. That I do see.
Right. That. Yeah. So I would say two things. I think that the patient data is incredibly valuable, but maybe it's not going to be. It's going to point us to what sort of metrics we should examine in a more rigorous clinical way. And that exploratory work has its own value that's, and then you just have to figure out how to operationalize it in a way that the FDA will approve. And the other thing is that I think not just getting more nuanced answers from the patients we have, but getting as many patients into these databases as possible. That's really key. Because, one thing we're looking at is, if, at some time we want to get into clinical trials, how can we find patients as quickly as possible? And the more patients that are there, then we can think about whatever appropriate way it is to contact them and, enroll them.
So along the line of how to get patients to engage and provide data based on some experiences we've had, well, in this not working with patients, but working with providers, incentives, and maybe that's a way that industry can help. For the patient portal, I don't know, sign up for the portal and have a chance to win a $50, $100 Amazon gift certificate and do it once a year, or send a certificate of thanks, a beautiful certificate. We have a project with the Centers for Disease Control where we ask patients to submit specimens for proficiency testing. It's a very interesting project, and And that's what the CDC does. They produce these beautiful thank you certificates, send it to the families. They love it. That's what we've heard. They participate and voluntarily give de-identified specimens for the CDC. They also give a gift card to the patients. And so that, where does that money come from? This is not really grant supported. These are ongoing projects. So I'm just proposing industry could play a role in building, getting patients to help build. What you really want is that building of a knowledge base. What does it mean if you have a variant of unknown significance or a polymorphism that nobody knows what it means? You have to follow the patients. So the patients are the key to tell you what you don't need to have fancy, what I'm saying? You don't need to have the clinicians necessarily involved if you can get patients to provide you data once a year about how they're doing. And maybe when they're 20 years old, maybe you'll find that something comes up of importance. So industry would gain by helping to build the knowledge base in that way. Thanks.
This is Stan Shortino from California, and we'll discuss this afternoon, but we're thinking about some way to, we collect clinical data over time after children are born, many different diseases. We're successful and unsuccessful in certain cases, and we would like to augment that information with information directly from patients and parents, so we'll talk about that a little bit this afternoon. But one thing I thought of, something that, all the all the participants at the table can work towards is this common set of metrics and outcomes that you can then, focus all your clinical trials, even if you're looking at different types of drugs or different approaches. Once you have this sort of level playing field of what metrics you're trying to hit, you can all share those metrics. I mean, it's all something that you could all participate in. You don't necessarily need to own them, and it's something that the larger community can get involved in as well. And that seems to be lacking for this disease at this point. So I think that would be a nice model as well. Thanks.
I myself was just recently diagnosed with this, and when I was diagnosed, I was given some one med, a couple referrals, and said come back in 4 months. I had to do the research on my own to find this. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can better reach patients. Like, I would have loved to have been told by my neurologist, hey, go find this organization, because I want to do whatever I can to help.
So, based on that experience, is there, do you have any insights or advice for how we could reach people better? I guess that's, we're on one side of the fence, you've approaching from the other side of the fence. Is it advertising? Is it knowledge? What is the kind of?
I mean, I would think my neurologist would say, hey, you've been diagnosed with this, go do this. Or once I had the genetic testing done, I don't know, I don't want all the information to come to me. I know I need to do my part in research, but I had no idea, and I want to do whatever I can. So, I don't know, getting to all the neurologists, I don't know.
I guess one possibility, if people are being diagnosed through very long chain fatty acid level testing, then we could work with the labs, which are few in number, that are doing that testing, to have a little link to ALD Connect with that lab result when that goes out to patients.
Aren't all of you neurologists part of just one club? You guys all talk to each other, right? I thought it was just one club.
So I just want to make a point about the lab test thing. So that's something that Bluebird Bio is actually looking into, is how can we, so we're focusing on the endocrinologist and the diagnosis of primary adrenal insufficiency. And if that lab test comes back, in a young boy, if a 21-hydroxylase test comes back normal, for primary adrenal insufficiency, we'd like to have some type of flag, red flag we're calling it, on that lab report that draws back to the guidelines, the PAI guidelines, in reference to measuring very long chain fatty acid testing. And so we agree 100% that that is one potential way to kind of raise awareness about this. In the folders that you have, one of the things that we partnered with ALD Connect on is this endocrinology awareness campaign, the Red Flag Flyer that's in those blue folders. And that was our thinking on this too. Like, going to the endocrinologist who might be seeing primary adrenal insufficiency and not ever realizing the potential association with ALD, is there something that we can do to remind them of this? And so what we did is we partnered with ALD Connect, we partnered with ALD Life in the UK, we partnered with Bob in Australia. We developed this Red Flag Flyer, which is a two-sided single sheet of paper that has information about the disease, information about the association with primary adrenal insufficiency, the simplicity of ordering a VLCFA test and some of the guidance around that. And we printed these up and we gave them to the advocates, who then went to, Janice was very involved in this as well, went to the endocrinology conferences and handed out thousands of these flyers. And it's amazing, these flyers are showing up everywhere. We were amazed to see them in the folders today. We see them in endocrinology offices, we see them hanging, we see people ordering them so they're not two-sided, but they're one-sided so that they can hang them on their walls. And so it's one step, it's a small step, and so ways that we can amplify that to hit every neurologist and whatever the case is definitely on our radar, and it's like, we're looking for help and advice from you guys on how can we do that.
Again, Lisa Feuchtbaum from the Genetic Disease Screening Program here in California. As far as families that will be impacted through newborn screening for ALD, we have a brochure called ALD in Babies, and we definitely have a section on where can I get more information, and we provide all the links to ALD Connect, Fight ALD, myelin.org, and Baby's First Test, which is a more broader newborn screening website, but it has wonderful information, including information about ALD. So moving forward, families, as they have children diagnosed with some form of ALD, will, it's just a matter of routine, and of course their primary care providers are going to be handing them the brochure, so the primary care providers will know about this, and of course the metabolic centers and the endocrine centers that we work with and neurology will get involved eventually. It's just going to take a matter of time, but these organizations should become known in California as a place where families can go.
Yeah, I just wanted to share the European experience to answer your question about how to get the information. In Europe, we have had political decision. In France first, we had the rare disease plan. So it was decided that there is not, we're talking about one disease, but there is many rare diseases, and for the neurologists to know all of them, although they might never encounter them in their clinic, is a challenge. So we had structured reference centers, which is one center in the country that will be specialized, that will regroup the specialists on the disease, and all the neurologists will know where to orient the patient. And in the reference center, we are in connection with ELA, which is Large Leukodystrophy Association, not only ALD, but the patient has a chance to know very fast about us, but then it's his freedom or not to contact us. And this is actually growing in Europe now. Europe is developing reference centers, and so this is in the making. So I don't know how in the US if you have that across the states, but that's because they can't know everything, although you have the red flag and the posters, and so that you have just to recognize you don't know, but if you have a name for the disease, if you diagnose with it, then you know where to ship the patient and say, okay, you'll get everything there. So
I'm part of the club of neurologists, so we do not have a way of getting educated sufficiently on rare diseases, to be honest, and we're very deficient, and we have very little experience. And even us, the ones taking care of specific population and being a reference center where people come to us knowing already about the disease or looking for special care about it, the experience that we have also is that the patients don't come back. And it's not that because they're not engaged, it's because there is a lot of burden with the disease. If you have an affected boy, you almost have one parent that quit their job to take care of this kid. That probably most commonly is the woman, and this is the heterozygotes that never come back to the clinic and gets care until she's very affected. The siblings, the women, the sisters that are carriers of these patients, it's a stigma to have this disease. And talking about starting a relationship, and I had to get screening for the gene and see if I have to do family planning. They're lifespan decisions. These patients, their patients have other parts of their life that are being like incorporated with development and with life itself. So I do think that we need to start, and we have started to change the focus. Patients come to the centers for specific care and specific occasions, but we need to get to the patients back. So I wanted to ask the newborn screening experts if there is any way when you contact these families, because we're going to be catching families through newborn screening, of getting a consent to be recontacted for information throughout life, basically. What I'm asking is, can we send a contact, a mail or something when they are 2 years of age, when they are 15 years of age, when they're, to remind them that there is testing to be done, that there is things that might be happening to them, and not to bring them back to the centers, just to make sure that they know there are resources out there that they can access. I think we need to get to the patients. There is a lot of burden from having the disease in the family, and the families don't even talk to each other. Like, we have families where there is a boy that died from the disease, and the cousins do not even know they need to get tested, because we can't talk about this. It's very sad.
So in California, we're trying to work up a new model, of contacting the parents and children later on to keep in touch with them in some fashion. But we haven't gotten far with that. But something completely different from what we've been doing before. But I think it would be necessary for ALD and some other diseases like ALD.
Yeah, I think the issue is that you really need a case manager. And the question is, who's the case manager? We don't really have a universal healthcare system that has a strong role for case management. Is it the genetic counselor? Is it a social worker? Like, who is the person that is like what do they call it? There's actually a term for it. It's kind of a patient navigator. I mean, that's really what's needed. Yeah. And so given that the genetic counselors certainly they're so busy these days, gosh, genetics is exploding, and they don't really, they've expressed the fact that they don't have the time to manage the patients over time. So I think that the solution that Stan was, and we'll talk about a little bit more, one is this. I think the patient portal is the way to go, from what I can tell, where the patients really kind of buy into and maybe with incentives, and you can expand the Neurobank perhaps to have patient reminder systems, and to notify them of clinical trials and really get them engaged in the patient portal. And so to a certain extent, they own the care of their child, like in a way, like they have the responsibility to manage the care of their child, but this is a tool that they could engage with and that will be interactive. And because the fact is, the way the healthcare system is set up, we don't really have a strong, patient advocate kind of system. And and what'll happen is families will just get lost over time, and we'll never know whether screening really made a difference in the lives of these families unless we get the data. So it's critical. Yeah, we'll talk about the system in California, how we work it, but we have relationships with physicians working in specialty care centers, and they're giving us data. But I'm concerned about the patients being engaged over the long term and having some kind of portal where they can feel comfortable and get their reminders that it's time for your MRI, and something that talks to them. So I think, unless other people have great ideas, which I'd love to hear, but we're open to trying to think about how to build something new.
I'd like to piggyback on Jana, your comment, share a couple things. I'm just trying to absorb all this information. It's fantastic. I remember a period in my life, I was 27, 28, just starting to kind of experience some things and feeling lost because I knew what I had. I was diagnosed when I was 23 because of my brother, but that sense of knowing where to go, who to talk to, what's out there. Is there anyone doing any kind of research? Is there anyone, and I'd hop online and go on Google, and I think, Josh, I'm trying to think of the first people I kind of contacted. We connected, and then I connected with Ben, and it's kind of been this snowballing effect of, just kind of it all rolling out and learning about everything and growing and developing and doing my own research. And one of the things I think that is very important for us when we talk about recruiting patients and sort of wrapping people in and getting people, and things, something like the NeuroTracker, is communicating a sense of promise and positivity about the future. I think that's so critical for the people, the patients that I've spoken to, and to counteract that being discouraged. And there's 15, 20, 25 people in my cell phone and people that I know that could be here but aren't around the country. And I think it boils down to just their understanding or perception of, yes, we're making progress, something's going to occur in the future, versus I'm screwed, I'm lost, I'm hopeless. And so if we can communicate that message better through the industry, our industry partners, through ALD Connect, whatever that means, say there is stuff on the horizon, and if you get involved, you're going to assist us in that effort, i.e. the NeuroTracker or whatever it might be. Yes, there is stuff out there, whether it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And if you get involved, that's going to help, and you communicate that message. And when people get that and that clicks, I think that's when you have that momentum and inertia. Another thing is I just hopped on, I pulled up a new fresh private window in my browser, and I just Googled adrenoleukodystrophy because we live in a web age. And the first place I go to when I need to find something is I hop on Google. And I do reading and go through 2-3 pages, right? And this is a question to address. ALD Connect's nowhere on the first page. And now Stop ALD is on the first page. We got a Wikipedia article. We got something from, the first result is actually from Medline Plus. Don't know what that is. And then we got some results, National Institute of Health. It seems to me like, if you're not really equipped, Bluebird Bio's on the first page, yay. ALD Foundation. So if you're not equipped, I could see you get lost in that, and this idea of, we live in 2016, this concept of landing pages and newly diagnosed, here's what you need to do, and really unifying the vision. So I think about stuff like that. I'm a tech recruiter, so let's call it SEO, and making sure that all the information online is up to date and accurate and effective. But I just really think about communicating the positivity. To me, that's so crucial in being here with you guys and hearing about everything. And I know, what it's like to slip into that kind of depressive mindset of it's over, screwed, So fighting against that is crucial, and communicating that message of positivity, I think is very important.
One idea that I been thinking about is in training these people, pediatricians, endocrinologists, and neurologists, child neurologists, metabolic, geneticists. I think in the training of a physician, there's very little awareness that patient advocacy groups or consortiums like this can provide way more support to the patient than the institution itself that they're accustomed to be providing care by. So I think there is maybe, I wouldn't say low-hanging fruit, but another effort that can be done in a much more broader way, on not just for ALD, but for a rare disease. If you're a clinician and you see a patient, encourage the patients to look for advocacy groups, even if you don't do it yourself. In critical care, we do this with each disease. We send the patients to the websites of the foundations for each disease, spinal cord injury, stroke, status epilepticus seizure foundations, because we lose them after the critical phase and we don't see them again. So that's something that we're doing in our particular ICU. But I think the training of the young clinicians could be a place where we can start making an impact, where the same way that you go to clinicaltrials.gov to look at clinical trials, there should be maybe even a place providing all these advocacy consortium groups for rare disorders where you can direct the patient directly so they're not lost after they leave your clinic.
Great. So thanks for all the input. I think that was fantastic to just get all this whole list of ideas, which I hope Sanjay and Gary will now carry forward to the next Industry Advisory Council group. Kendrick, everyone who's not here, right? But you will mediate that. And I think we have a nice wish list and items that clearly you should think through and try to make concrete. So with that.